In the Soviet Union, America was simultaneously a worker's nightmare, a jeans and coke paradise, and a land where everyone might be a spy. How could one country exist in three completely different versions inside people's heads? The answer reveals something fascinating about Cold War psychology, and it's way more complicated than everyone was brainwashed. This is the story of the three Americas that lived in Soviet minds. Let me paint you a picture. It's 1978. You're a Soviet teenager sitting in political information class, listening to your teacher explain how American workers are exploited by capitalism, while secretly dreaming about the pack of Wrigley's gum your uncle smuggled back from a trip to Finland. Welcome to the Soviet contradiction. In the USSR, America existed as three distinct realities layered on top of each other. First, there was newspaper America, the official version. This was capitalism as exploitation, endless unemployment, police violence, strikes, racism, segregation, and warmongering. Every copy of Pravda had a story about American workers suffering under the boot of capital. The satirical magazine Crocodile would show fat capitalists smoking cigars while workers starved. Soviet films about America featured spies, the mafia, and gangsters. This was the America you were supposed to believe in. But here's the thing. Even the propaganda accidentally revealed the second America. Thing America, or Brand America. This was the America of objects, consumer goods, material proof that the West had something the Soviet Union desperately wanted. Jeans, especially Levi's. Chewing gum, which was both exotic and illegal. Sneakers, particularly Adidas or Converse, cassette tapes and vinyl records, smuggled or traded on the black market, and of course, Coca-Cola and Pepsi, symbols of a lifestyle that didn't require standing in line for 2 hours. These weren't just products, they were tiny windows into another world. The word was dostat, meaning to get, as in, I managed to get some American gum. Getting these items was a form of social currency. And then there was the third America, Kitchen America. This was the private, whispered America discussed behind closed doors. Sailors who'd seen New York Harbor, translators who'd worked with American diplomats, foreign students who'd met Americans at international festivals. Late at night, people would huddle around radios trying to catch Voice of America or BBC broadcasts through the Soviet jamming. These three Americas created a kind of cognitive dissonance that many Soviets just accepted as normal. You could simultaneously believe America was an imperialist nightmare and still desperately want a pair of American jeans. Both things were true in different contexts. So where did these images actually come from? Let's break it down. Every week in school, students sat through political information sessions, essentially current events filtered through Soviet ideology. Teachers would discuss international news, always emphasizing American failures. Pravda and Izvestia, the main newspapers, ran constant stories about unemployment, crime, and inequality in America. And they weren't entirely wrong. These were real issues. But the framing made it seem like every American was either homeless or a millionaire exploiting the homeless. Soviet cinema about America fell into predictable categories: spy thrillers, gangster films, and stories about noble American communists fighting the system. The 1975 film The Detached Mission showed American POWs in Vietnam. The 1973 film The Incredible Adventures of Italians in Russia had American CIA agents as bumbling villains. But here's where it gets interesting. Let's talk about unemployment, this signature symbol of capitalism in Soviet propaganda. Every Soviet child learned that capitalism meant unemployment, that workers had no security, that you could lose your job tomorrow. And this was partially true. American unemployment existed, recessions happened, but Soviet films showing unemployment would also accidentally show cars, multiple cars, houses, consumer goods in the background. So Soviets would look at footage of American unemployment lines and think, wait, the unemployed people have cars? Then there was racism and segregation. Soviet propaganda used American racial inequality as proof of capitalist hypocrisy. And to be clear, this was a real issue, not just propaganda. The USSR positioned itself as a society without racism, a haven for people of all ethnicities. They highlighted American segregation, police violence against Black Americans, and the civil rights struggles. African students in Moscow were used as proof of Soviet tolerance. The irony, of course, was that the USSR had its own ethnic tensions and discrimination, but those weren't discussed in Pravda. Soviet media portrayed American police as brutal enforcers of capital. Protests were shown as the state crushing dissent. The 1970 Kent State shooting was huge news in Soviet media, used to show how America treated its own citizens. And this created a weird paradox. Soviets were told America was this totalitarian police state, but also that Americans had freedom of speech and could protest. How could both be true? The mafia and gangsters became the default American vibe through cinema. Films like The Godfather were banned, but people knew about them through word of mouth. Soviet movies portrayed America as a land of organized crime, where violence was casual and money ruled everything. This created a strange romanticization. The mafia was both terrifying and kind of cool, a symbol of American lawlessness that was secretly appealing in a society with so many rules. Then there was advertising culture. For Soviets, advertising was alien and almost magical. In the USSR, you didn't need advertising because there was nothing to buy. There were shortages, not choices. American advertising persuaded you to buy things you didn't even know existed. This seemed simultaneously wasteful and incredibly sophisticated. The concept of marketing, of creating desire, was foreign. Soviet ads were basic. Drink Soviet champagne. American ads were psychological warfare. And then there were supermarkets. Oh, the supermarkets. This was near mythology. 50 types of cereal, endless choices of everything. No lines, no shortages, no, sorry, we only have turnips today. Soviet grocery stores had queues where you'd wait hours for basic goods, and the shelves were often empty. Stories of American supermarkets circulated like legends. Some people thought they were exaggerated. When Boris Yeltsin visited an American supermarket in 1989, he was reportedly so shocked he questioned everything he'd been told about capitalism. There was also the American smile, which Soviets found deeply weird. Americans smiled at strangers. Why? Were they selling something? Were they spies? In Soviet culture, smiling at strangers was considered insincere or suspicious. A genuine smile was reserved for people you actually knew. The American service industry smile seemed fake, like everyone was trying to sell you something or manipulate you. This led to the joke, an American smiles because they want something from you. A Russian doesn't smile because they don't. Both sides had spy mania. The USSR thought America was full of CIA agents. Americans thought the USSR was full of KGB agents. Both were partially correct. Translators were the most powerful people in any room with foreigners because they controlled information flow. A good translator could soften or intensify messages. Being a translator was prestigious and dangerous. You knew too much. Now, let's talk about the moments when reality broke through the propaganda. 1959, the American National Exhibition in Moscow. This was huge. The Soviets allowed an American exhibition showcasing consumer goods, technology, and, most famously, a model American kitchen. Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev and American Vice President Richard Nixon had their famous kitchen debate about which system was better. But the real impact was on ordinary Soviets who visited. They saw dishwashers, color televisions, modern appliances, suburban home designs. For many, it was the first time the rumors about American consumer abundance felt real. The exhibition drew millions of visitors. Then there was Pepsi diplomacy. In 1959, Pepsi became the first American consumer product officially sold in the Soviet Union, thanks to a deal between Pepsi executive Donald Kendall and Khrushchev. This was soft power in action. Pepsi wasn't just a drink, it was a symbol. Drinking Pepsi didn't make you a capitalist traitor, it made you modern. By the 1970s, Pepsi was everywhere, and the government even allowed it. The Soviet relationship with America shifted dramatically over time. In the 1940s, during World War II, America was an ally, the arsenal of democracy fighting fascism alongside the USSR. But by the late 1940s and into the 1950s, America became enemy number one. The Cold War, the nuclear arms race, the Korean War, propaganda portrayed America as an existential threat. The 1960s and 70s brought détente, or easing of tensions. Cultural exchanges happened. American music, especially jazz and rock, filtered in through unofficial channels. People became curious. By the 1980s, more information was flowing. Gorbachev's glasnost policies meant more openness. People learned more about both countries, and the myths started breaking down on both sides. Here's the key point. Soviet people were criticized by their own government for being interested in America, but they were human beings with curiosity about the outside world. Americans were criticized for real issues: racism, inequality, the Vietnam War, poverty among plenty. But they were also admired for consumer comfort, technological achievement, cultural exports like jazz and rock music, and individual freedoms. The Soviet government constantly reframed America through Soviet needs. When they needed to criticize capitalism, they highlighted poverty. When they needed to show Soviet progress, they compared space achievements. America was always a mirror for Soviet anxieties. And here's the fascinating part. Americans did the exact same thing with the USSR. Both superpowers used the other as a funhouse mirror, reflecting back distorted versions of themselves. Neither side saw the other clearly. Both saw propaganda mixed with glimpses of truth, filtered through ideology and fear and curiosity and desire. So what's the takeaway? The way Soviet people pictured America tells us that people are complicated. They can hold contradictory beliefs. They can distrust a system while desiring its products. They can recognize propaganda while still being influenced by it. The Cold War created two realities separated by an iron curtain, but human curiosity kept finding cracks in that curtain. A pack of gum, a smuggled record, a late-night radio broadcast. These tiny connections mattered. In the end, both America and the USSR were real places with real problems and real achievements, but in the minds of their citizens, they also existed as myths, symbols, and contradictions. Two superpowers, two funhouse mirrors. If you found this video interesting, consider subscribing. And here's a question for the comments. If you grew up during the Cold War, what did you think about the other side? Or if you're younger, what surprises you most about these perceptions? Let me know.